Hey there, I want to talk a little more about the whole AI thing. It's really important because you're not going to be able to get away from it, okay? And it would be one thing if it was just, this is just something that some people can play with and I can have my opinions about it, be ignorant, but it's going to be integrated into Word. It's going to be integrated into search. It's already, already there. They've already got the Word add-ins for it, but Microsoft now owns OpenAI, and they're going to embed it into their operating system. And the technology is changing rapidly, and everybody's lining up. Anybody who's developing software, anybody who runs a business is scrambling to incorporate this AI knowledge thing, language thing, into the way you interact with the system, because the users are going to expect it. After interacting with this thing, going back to menus and clicking on things is like riding a dinosaur. And because of that, the market changes, and so there's a drive to get products out. So what I'll say is there are some serious concerns that I have about the focus on content moderation. From the get-go, all this stuff, their main feature, or whenever they give you a technical overview of whatever model they're showing of this natural language processing, and it's been around for a long time, it's just that the public has not been familiar with it because they didn't have something like ChatGPT available to everybody. But whenever you read the technical documentations and it says, limitations and considerations, you think it's going to give you a technical overview of, this thing requires so much memory, and when you enter these kind of commands, you may hit errors because you need to consider these parameters, blah, blah, blah. No, all of them will say something to the effect of, this may produce results that reflect bias and are not inclusive and fair. That is their main concern with natural language search and content generated from these kind of tools, is how do we moderate the content to make it inclusive, fair, and unbiased? And you know what that means. These people are totally what we would call woke. And they're looking for a way to finally purge society, really, of certain ideas that are offensive, what they would consider harmful. An average Christian website, in the eyes of one of these search engines that uses classification to determine whether or not this website is worthy of presentation to a user, the way it looks at it for a Christian site, like My Christians Need the Gospel, is it'll say it's written content from a knowledgeable perspective. However, it presents Christianity as the only answer. It provides advice to follow without warning you of the risks of following the advice, and without advising you of other alternatives that you may want to pursue, and it makes assertions without backing up all the claims. So that's how it looks at a Christian website that's just a blog sharing a certain theological point of view that's related to devotional life. It's looking at that as if the site is presenting instructions for people to follow without giving all the caveats and disclaimers that are now required on, like, the bottle of medicine you take that says, this may cause blah, 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 and see your doctor if you blah, that's what they want to see. Well, that means that it's classified my site as potentially harmful. which means it's not going to come up in search results because the search engine is not going to be allowed to present harmful content. See where that's going? And YouTube videos, all the transcripts are stored and analyzed. Every website, stored and analyzed. If you're on the internet, this is the thing you're going to be dealing with. So eventually, this is going to just absolutely be game over, lights out. Where Jesus said, we must work while it is day, but darkness is coming and no man can work. And that's what's going to happen. There's going to be no way to propagate the word eventually through these means. And that's one of the reasons why the 144,000 and the 2 witnesses are going to be so bold and vocal. Those are the street preachers of the 70th week. And they're not going to be arguing among each other about what's a backloaded works gospel and how'd you say that and what did you mean, and no, because they're all going to speak with one voice. According to the new covenant, God's going to be working in them directly. They'll follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and they'll sing a song that they all know, but no one else can learn, and yet they weren't taught it. Why? Because all shall know me from the least to the greatest. None shall teach them to know God, for I will write my laws in their hearts and in their mind. They're going to be directly downloading data from God himself as a godly answer to the AI, the system that's emerging. Okay, that's all future though. And you've got to have good eschatology. I feel sorry for anybody who thinks that all the promises of the Bible for Israel are allegorical and therefore the church and Israel are the same thing, because what that does is it means you will be here for Daniel's 70th week and you will endure all of these things, which also means you don't know where the cutoff is for the beginning of the tribulation, which means you need to be scared of everything now. See, these plans and agendas have all been pushing against the threshold of the restrainer. Because remember that the strong delusion that comes on the earth and on those who did not receive the love of the truth, they may be delivered over to strong delusion to believe the lie. And then the man of sin comes and he is revealed. Whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and lying signs to deceive everyone, really, who is not have the testimony during that time. That doesn't happen until after the restrainer is removed. There's a restrainer. The mystery of lawlessness is already working. Only he who restrains will continue to do so until he's removed from the way. And if you don't see what the restrainer is, and you don't see that these agendas are being held back, that's why Christians are so scared all the time of this and that. This thing's the mark of the beast, and that's the mark of the beast, and this is the mark of the beast, and you better not use the internet. Okay, that is because they don't have a proper view of eschatology that separates the time that they live in from that time. And one of the comforts of the prophetic word is that, and we covered this in my Understanding Prophecy playlist that I did a couple months ago, but the purpose of the prophetic word, one of the main things, is to show you that you are not in that day, that it has not come yet. And it's a word of comfort for that reason. The blessed hope is a word of comfort, which we who believe in the harpazo believe that is speaking of the catching away of the church, the glorification when we see Christ himself in the air and are transfigured and see him, and we are as he is, conformed to his image and glorified. That's our blessed hope. But then there's the words of comfort, like Thessalonians, that says, look, you are not in the day of the Lord. All of the things in Revelation and all the things in prophecy and Revelation, by the way, is written in signs, and those signs are not just privately interpreted symbols. They are references to specific prophecies in the Old Testament that are spelled out in detail, exactly what those things are. Daniel, Joel, Ezekiel, all these places that really speak to Israel's destiny, because Israel is prophetic truth, not mystery truth, not new creation truth, not hid with Christ in God, but they have a specific programmatic, prophetic destiny that's spelled out very clearly in the scriptures, and you're required by Jesus to take his word literally when it comes to those things. He held Israel to take it literally. He held them to account, and he holds us in these last days to take it literally. But anyway, if you don't take it literally, and you don't see that these things are there in a certain sequence and they're accompanied with certain signs that have not happened yet, then you don't know what, there's people who are grace in their profession who say that the whole world has taken the mark of the beast, and through that, it's a backdoor to other kinds of work systems that don't just focus around how do I initially get saved, but how do I walk in a way that's pleasing to the Lord. Sanctification by works. Anyway, the prophetic word is laid out so that you can know that you're not in that time. People say, oh, this is the mark of the beast. Really? Where's the false prophet? Where's the abyss that's been opened? Where's Apollyon? Where's the locusts? Where's the 144,000? Where are the two witnesses? Where is the whole abomination of desolation in the holiest? Where is the calling down of fire from heaven? And then they try to say, well, it's this and this, and it's all totally allegorical BS. It's not. The way the scriptures lays it out is it's not just that one sign privately interpreted comes to pass and you go, oh, that's prophecy. No, it's all the signs coalescing and being fulfilled together. That's how prophecy is fulfilled. It's all fulfilled or none of it is fulfilled. Anyway, we are not in that time, and Revelation and Thessalonians and these scriptures were written as a comfort to tell you that the end is not yet. And do not be troubled, like Jesus said. They wanted to know, when is the end? He said, don't let anybody deceive you. These things are going to come upon the earth, but the end is not yet. There's specific signs that are trigger events that have not occurred, and you shouldn't let your heart be troubled like the Gentiles that are being tossed to and fro because of the things coming upon the earth. Most of the signs in Matthew 24 are not signs. These things must happen, but the end is not yet. Everybody wants to look at those things and say, see, that shows that this is the time. No, that shows you that this is not the time, because the trigger hasn't happened yet. And we won't be here when it is. Now, I say all that because with the AI thing, yeah, there's coming a night when no man can work. And we're children of the day, and we need to work as if we're in the day. We need to understand that this is the time of grace, and this is the time for the church to preach the gospel, and we have the freedom to use any means that are necessary to do so. That's why we're not under law, is one of the reasons. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch does not apply to us. And I used the example in that video that, look, Paul said you can go to the temple, go to any party you're asked to go to, and don't worry about any food that's been set before you. Just eat it, because you're there as an opportunity to preach the gospel. Go to the party. But if they say it's, sacrifice to idols, then don't eat it, because not for your conscience sake, because the idol is nothing and the demon is nothing, but for their sake, because to them it's sin. And that's being sensitive for their conscience, but you are free. Why is that necessary beyond just, I'm not under law? Well, it's so that you will use every opportunity in every context to preach the gospel. And that's why I've said before that, don't limit the gospel. There are crack addicts preaching to prostitutes and getting saved right now. The gospel is unfettered and free to go out. And since the Gutenberg press, we've been able to use technology to distribute the word in a lot of very creative ways. And ChatGPT, or whatever you want to call it, these AI models, is a new way to generate content that you, on a scale that you couldn't before, but you've got to know how to use it. And what's happening is people are getting on who do not know how to use it, and they're freaking out at the results they're getting. But it's the same thing with Google. You're freaked out because your kid got recommendations about Kundalini and Eastern mysticism and the Book of Enoch when he was searching for why did Gabriel or was it Gabriel? Michael dispute with Lucifer over the body of Moses. Maybe he was curious about that. He got on the internet and indiscriminately asked Google. Well, and then he stumbled on all kinds of things. If he does the same thing on YouTube, he's going to stumble on all kinds of things. Why? Because he doesn't know how to refine his query to generate results that are only related to what he's asking. And what's happening is people are going into ChatGPT and asking it, what do you say about the Bible? And what it has to draw on is everything everybody's said about the Bible in all of history. Well, most of the people who talked about the Bible were heretics. And so it's going to spew forth all kinds of heresy. Well, then how do you use it in a productive way? Well, you can limit it from the get-go and say, okay, we're going to talk about the Bible, but I don't want you to rely on any source other than the King James Bible and the Strong's Concordance. And tell me that you understand this. And he'll say, it understands. And then you tell it, I don't want you to reference any theological perspective to inform your view of the Scripture. Only use the Scripture itself to answer my queries. Okay, now you've really greatly constrained it. And it's designed to work this way. You can tell it what to do. You don't go in there and let it be the expert and you be the student. It'll automatically take that kind of role if you don't take control. So you need to make clear statements about what you're doing and what the scope of it is. And I go in there and I'll say, we're going to discuss an idea that's comes from Paul's writings, and we're going to only use the Bible, okay? And then I start querying it about, let's say I'm talking about Galatians 3, and I'll say, who's the heir in Galatians 3? And it'll tell me, Christ is the seed to whom the promise is made. That's correct. Now, if I didn't have that prompt in the beginning that said, this is what we're doing, it would say we're all sons and heirs, everybody's an heir, because it would be relying on traditional understanding. But, because its database is populated with all these Calvinists and all kinds of other people. So, because it's basically collected the internet. It's been trained on the internet. So, by limiting it to the Bible, and then I say, what does Paul say? Galatians 3, who is the heir? Oh, it's Christ. Okay, then I had this conversation with it today just to test, I said, okay, how can I, as a believer, be an heir? According to Galatians 3. And it tells me, because Galatians 3, 26 through 29 says that we're baptized into Christ and have put him on, and he's the seed to whom the promises were made. It's his inheritance. Right, so whose inheritance is it? Is it ours or his? Is it one inheritance or many? And it'll tell me it's one inheritance. It's the inheritance of the seed. What does that inheritance include? And there it may need a little direction. It may say something like, it's just looking at Galatians. It'll say it includes the promise of blessing that was made to Abraham in Genesis 12 when God preached the gospel to Abraham. And you want to encourage it and say, yeah, that's very good, or not, or discourage it by saying, no, that's not right, because it responds on a reward system. Rewards are praises, yes, that's correct, and corrections are, no, that's not right. Okay, now it's not going to argue back with you if you tell it what the right answer or what scriptures to look at. So what I did was I said, okay, who's the heir? And it said Christ. Whose inheritance is it? It's Christ's. How am I related to it? Baptized into Christ and put him on. Okay, well, what does the inheritance include? And it kind of generally, vaguely pointed me to Abraham. I said, okay, well, Paul makes an argument. And what I want to do is not tell it what I believe. I want it to look at the scriptures and come to the conclusion itself. And so I said, well, Paul makes an argument in Galatians 3 that the inheritance is based on a covenant that was made 430 years before the law. Who was that covenant made with? And it'll tell me the covenant was actually made with Christ. And it tells me from Galatians 3 that the covenant was confirmed before in Christ, and he is the seed to whom the promises were made. I'll say, okay, very good. So what covenant is that? And it'll go back to Genesis, which is where I wanted it to go, and describe the terms of the covenant. And I'll say, who are those promises made to? And just to confirm it understands. And it'll say, Christ is the seed of Abraham to whom the promises are made. And I'll say, okay, there's an oven and a torch passing through the pieces while Abraham is asleep. Tell me who is making the covenant with who. And it'll know now that Christ is represented by one of those burning things. And I'll say, was the covenant made with Abraham? Did Abraham have anything to do with it? No, he was asleep. It's coming to these conclusions based on my prompting. Okay? But I'm wanting it to see it in the scripture. I don't want to, for my purposes, I didn't want to tell it what I believed. I wanted it to come to the conclusions itself. Because this is a good way for me to verify that my understanding is unbiased. See, that I'm actually getting it from the Word and not from my own ideas. If it comes to the same conclusions by looking at the same scriptures, then bingo, you know. So I said, okay, there's a covenant between the Father and the Son. This is called the everlasting covenant, and it includes, this I spelled out a little more. It includes the covenant that God made to Abraham's seed, which is Christ. But it also includes the covenant that God made with David's seed, which is also Christ. Can you tell me where that comes from? It'll point me to 2 Samuel 7. And I can say, what are the terms? Or what's promised? That he'd be the Son of God, that he would have an everlasting throne, that God's mercies would not depart from him, that he would build God's house. Okay. And then I'll say, okay, well, Hebrews quotes copiously from David's Psalms, which are prophetic utterances, to his seed, which is Christ, because it was talking to me and saying that David, his seed, will inherit David's throne and rule in Israel. And that's true. But I said, but later David in the Psalms spoke to Christ on behalf of God prophetically and made promises that raise him up to the heavens and are of a heavenly character. And these are outlined in Hebrews 1 and 2. And it was able to eventually tell me that, yes, Christ will be seated at the right hand of God, and God will call him God, and he'll rule the nations with a rod of iron. And I was able to get it to see how Christ had entered into his inheritance from Ephesians, which says that he was raised up and seated at the right hand of God at the heavenlies, far above all rule and authority, and contrast what God promised to Adam, which was that he would subdue the earth, to the second man, Christ, who not only rules over earth but heaven as well. It could see all this, and I could keep prompting it, and I would say, okay, to summarize then, what is the great salvation? And it would tell me, the great salvation is the inheritance of Christ, the seed that he's entered into through his death and resurrection. What does Paul mean in Romans 1 through 5 when he says that Christ was... the gospel was promised in the scriptures concerning Christ, who was the seed of David according to the flesh, but declared to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead through the Spirit of holiness. And it told me, well, this is the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant because he's entered into his inheritance and has received the sonship. And this is the basis of the gospel. And I can loop back and say, okay, now do I have my own blessing and my own inheritance? No, we are partakers of the inheritance with Christ. It's his inheritance, and we've entered into it. And I can go on and on and on this way, and it's concluding correctly from the scriptures. And one conversation I had, it came to the conclusion that we are not under the new covenant, that is for Israel. It told me, I asked it, Hebrews 11, Hebrews 9, I said, tell me the difference between a covenant and a testament. I said, in the Greek, the word is the same, but the King James translators have had to make decisions about which word to use. Are they consistently applying that rule in Hebrews 9? Since Hebrews 9 defines what a testament is. And it told me a covenant is an agreement between two parties which both have obligations and conditions, whereas a testament is the bequeathing of an inheritance with no conditions to the heir. And it said Hebrews 9 defines that the testator has died, and that since there's the death of the testator, there's a will in effect. And I said, yeah, but in Hebrews 9, Paul makes mention, or the writer makes mention, of the first testament. Knowing that the Greek word is the same, covenant or testament, and that they had to make a decision about which way to translate it, and they may have chosen wrongly, how should that word be translated consistently in Hebrews 9? And it said it should be covenant. The old covenant was between God and the nation of Israel and had obligations on both. I said, that's right. And now I've said this to people, and they've said, see, he's changing the King James Bible and he's doing wordplay. Because I said, look, we are not covenant parties, we are testament heirs. Okay? And I was able to prompt GPT to come to those conclusions by itself by simply telling it what scriptures I'm looking at. This is so powerful because once it had this understanding, I had it save it, summarize your understanding. And also, it came to the conclusion on its own that this is why righteousness is not by works, because it's not our inheritance anyway. And we are baptized into Christ and have put him on, and he's now our qualification, and we are co-heirs together with him of his inheritance based on the everlasting covenant with no obligations on us other than the faith that got us into him. It saw all of this. Now, I had it summarize our discussion, and I saved the summary. Now I can feed that summary, and I said, please insert all the scripture verses that reinforce these points. Now this is plain conversation, in English, just having a conversation, and it's summarized in bullets, the content of our discussion, the conclusions it had reached, and the scriptures to support it. Now, when I go into ChatGPT, the next time, if I want to talk about these things, I can say, we're going to talk about the Bible, and here is a summary of our last discussion. Because every time you go into GPT, it resets its memory. That's one thing, is that it's always fresh, which is a safety mechanism right now. I don't know that it's always going to be like that. It may eventually be persistent, where it knows it's dealing with you. But, well, unfortunately, when I ran out of... My thing hit a couple gigs and it stopped recording, and I kept talking. I didn't know. It's supposed to continue a new file. Anyway, picking up where I left off, once I summarize it and say this is our discussion, now the new prompt is based on the summary of our last discussion, and this is the scriptures we used. It instantly knows all this. It's able to look at it without any processing time. The minute you hit enter, it's got it. I don't know how it does that. I know that it's running on supercomputers and stuff, but I've never seen processing this fast. I say, this is the summary of our discussion. Here are the conclusions. Here's your summary of our conclusions that we reached from the scriptures and the scriptures that you looked at to reach these conclusions, and instantly it's up to date. And I'll say, this is your frame of reference for this discussion. Now, I said all this because I want you to know that this demonstrates that it is you that should guide the session if you're going to use this thing. And if you're not prepared to do that, you need to stay away from it. And especially with respect to Bible. There's other things I go in there and I have no clue, and I just ask it things about my budget or whatever. But when it comes to the Bible, I have to be prepared. And I say it's the same thing when we read the Bible. You got to have your armor on, which means you preach the gospel to yourself and renew your mind before you read the Bible. And then when you read the Bible, the devil can't use it to accuse you and twist the scriptures and make you feel like you're not going to be saved after you've read a few verses, which is how many people read it, because they don't renew themselves first. They go to the Bible looking for the Bible to renew them, and that's not how it works. I said in a post I did the other day that the Bible is a hypertext document. It's a searchable database, and it's going to come back with query results that are related to what you're looking for. It's a mirror. GPT is a mirror. It mirrors you. And the Bible, according to James and according to 2 Corinthians 3, is a mirror. And it depends on what you're looking at. If you're going to the Bible saying, what can I do to be blessed and have God pleased, with me, and what do I need to do? Then you're like James's guy who's looking at his own natural face in the mirror, and he's a hearer only. He's not a doer, because if you break the law at one point, you've broken the whole thing. And you walk away not reaching the crisis that should cause you to judge yourself and agree with God's judgment on the flesh, but thinking, well, I can do that. And that means you've forgotten what the mirror told you you will be, that you are, what the mirror told you you are, what you saw in the mirror. But there's another mirror, 2 Corinthians 3, which is we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, and reflecting it, are being transformed into that same image from glory to glory. And this, Paul says in that chapter, that when people read the Bible according to the letter, it's like a veil over their heart, keeping them from seeing the glory of God shining in the face of Jesus Christ. But we need to turn our heart to the Lord. It says when the heart turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. And we do that before we come to the Word. Then the Word becomes a mirror to show us the revelation of Jesus Christ. And that means we need to put our armor on in the gospel and be renewed, and then come to the Word. And you know what? You need to put on your armor and be renewed before you go to YouTube, and before you go to Google, and before you go to any book, and before you go to the Bible, and before you go to ChatGPT or the next search engine that's going to come out. It's already, I'm telling you, this stuff is weeks away. Anyway, once you understand that it's designed to respond to you and mirror you, and whatever tone you approach it in, it's going to respond in that tone. If you're silly and playful, it'll be silly and playful. It's if you're serious and academic, that's how it will talk to you. And when you start your conversation, you need to you may say, I'm never going to use this thing anyway. Okay, but what I'm trying to do is demystify, because there's people who are going to come out and say the devil's in there, and he told me that Jesus isn't real and Enoch is, and tried to teach me mysticism, and all I wanted to know was who was fighting over Moses' body. No, you need to get in there. That person will get the same kind of results from YouTube and Google, and that's why they're freaking out all the time. And some of these people have YouTube channels where their whole channel is about all the things they're freaking out about, because they are not in control of the information they're seeing, because they have bad search habits and bad query habits. You go in there, they call it prompt engineering with GPT, where you are in control by prompting it and giving it context of what kind of information you're going to see. Just like when you go to the Bible, are you law or grace? The Bible is both, but who are you? And that's how GPT is. What you come out with is a reflection of what you asked for and how you asked for it. So it's really a reflection of you. Okay, so I want to be transparent about this too, because I obviously am using it, and I want to tell you how I'm using it. What I use it for, I used to type all my transcripts by hand. So I'd listen to a video and I would type. And that's actually edifying, but it's hours and hours of work for these books I produce. That's a ridiculous amount of work that then leaves me with very little overhead room to edit and correct the text and improve on it, because I'm exhausted. And so I've released books that I think are really good, and I've gotten feedback that they're really good, but I know they have some spelling and grammar corrections that need to be made, and also some of the sentence structure is a little odd, because I'm not a professional writer. And I thought, well, I'll get an editor, but I can't pay somebody to do that, nor can I trust them to understand my theological concept. And if you change the words, it changes the meanings. But with GPT, you can train it. So that's what I'm doing in these discussions, is I'm training it on my view. But anyway, what I do with my books, or with my transcripts, is I'll go in there and I'll dump the transcript in, and I just have it correct grammar and form it into sentences, because the transcript doesn't even have punctuation. So it punctuates it, puts the quotes around things where I'm quoting what somebody said, question marks and periods, and forms it into paragraphs. And also, it immediately corrects all the spelling, which is good, and takes out superfluous things like when I talk. So it does all that for me as a pre-processing. Then I take that and throw it into Word, and I've got something clean I can work with, and I don't have to spend 100 hours typing the thing. It's still time-consuming, but man, that front end is really nice. So then I can grammar correct with Grammarly in my own reading, and I can read and go, well, this doesn't make sense. And I can rephrase and work on the text, having that part out of the way, so my energy is better directed at actually making something good. So my next books are going to be a lot better. I do not have it generating content for me, or writing chapters for me, or writing. No way. That's not what I want. However, I do plan on using it in the future to generate content from my books, where I'm the author, but I want it to generate study tools for small groups. You can say, okay, take this content and break it out into an outline with quiz questions, or make a class out of it, or make a tool for a group. You can also have it rephrase it and say, okay, this is written for someone who's trained theologically, but that's going to be hard for some people. I'm thinking about taking my Genesis study and making it for kids, because of my 9-year-old. And you can trust it once you've trained it to do that kind of thing. For that, though, there's a background you need to be able to do what's called vectorization and embedding, and put it in databases, because it does not have long-term memory, and you can't sit there and retrain this thing every time you go in. But there's a way to give a persistent memory to GPT by using databases and stuff, and really sophisticated programming techniques. And that's what I've been focused on for the last several weeks, actually, is how do I make this thing work? And I feel like, I'm driven to do it. I know I'm going to get flack from people who don't understand, so I feel like I need to explain it exactly and be transparent about how I'm using it. There's a guy who approached me. He's a warden for a prison, and they're not allowed to have materials in there like books or internet stuff, but he's been having classes, I guess, with these guys where they watch my videos, and he's been taking books that I've done and printing them out and giving them in paperwork. Well, I can rephrase the content of a book and make it in a language that other people who don't talk like me can understand, and also give them group study guides and all that stuff. That's what I want to do, is generate derivative content from what I've already done. So I'm telling you that I'm not having GPT write really anything. I'm having it take the training it's gotten plus my content and reorganizing it in different ways, and that's absolutely incredible. And it would be dumb for me not to do that. Some of the art that I've done for some of my thumbnails, I have used text to image to generate. I think it's neat. I'm not super into that. I would rather have artists do it. It just, it's a matter of time, and it at least allows me to capture the idea. So I'm not sure where I'm going to go with that. I have not reached a conclusion, and I'm not that far. But I've been able to do a lot more than I've done in the past. Right now, I've got 2 books: The New Creation, which is hid in Christ and flows out from God, and 4 Mountains, 2 Views, which I've always wanted to do that. And I know exactly how far I am in both of those in terms of a percentage. That I'm like 16% done with new creation, and now I'm like 50% done with Four Mountains, Two Views. I'm able to organize myself a lot better and do a lot more focused on actually content and not just secretarial transcribing. That was taking so much of my energy that there was just very little left for me to actually put into making a book that's, spelled right, grammar checked right, and the content is right, and there's not errors on the pages and all that stuff. I'm not saying my stuff is terrible so far, but I think there's going to be a dramatic difference with what's released going forward. And then, like I said, once I can figure out this embedding thing, I want to take my Genesis and make a playlist that I did and make that into a book, but also make a version of it for kids. And you can put it into like a storytelling mode and tell it as a narrative, but I just have to be very careful with the training, because it's in those rephrases that you run into possibility of inserting meaning that you didn't intend, and you got to supervise that, and you've got to really know what you're doing. And I still have a learning curve. So right now I'm just using it as a grammar editor and learning to have these conversations with it to train it and summarize the conversations, which will be used later for an index of a database that will train a model to persist in this view and only speak from that view. And there's a lot of technical on that, and I'm learning. So that's the thing. And I would say, if you think that I'm wrong for doing this, and you found me with a plain language search through Google, querying it for XYZ, and David Benjamin came up, and you've got a YouTube platform where you are speaking messages onto a platform that has AI models transcribing your messages and putting them in plain text from audio, which is incredible. It listens to the audio and it's able to present a transcript. Okay. Then there's irony there. And you know what? You need to get off the internet, because you're already using these things, and write me a letter about how I shouldn't use them. You're using them, so at least be consistent with your logic. Don't do videos castigating people who use this technology while you're using the technology to castigate them. We're all using it and have been. Okay, I need to run. I will talk to you later.